Hi, my name is Zach Camden. I wanted to make a short video presentation of my research paper. My topic was comparing the drawbacks and benefits of online learning versus traditional in-person learning. This has been a very relevant topic recently, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. In the spring semester, of course, every student had to, in some way, give up one of their face-to-face classes or more than one of their face-to-face classes and face the transition of completely online schooling. And with the way things are going right now, I wouldn't be surprised if fall semester is also entirely online. The first part of my paper gives a brief history of some of the important points in online learning. Of course, online classes and online schooling weren't invented the same time the internet was, so it took a while for schools and universities to develop the software and the databases for the students to use. In the 1960s is when the University of Illinois first created their online database and put lectures and information online for students to access when they're not inside the classroom. Liberty University was the first noted university to have an entirely online degree program. Now, this is a big deal because there are hundreds of universities and colleges around the world that now offer completely online degree programs without even having to set foot on campus. Traditional in-person learning simply refers to being in a classroom with a teacher and other students, the traditional way of having class. In my paper, I go over the drawbacks and the benefits of traditional and online learning to try to figure out which actually is the most effective. They each have their benefits and they each have their drawbacks. My hypothesis for my paper was that despite all the benefits that comes with online learning, it can actually be more stressful and more difficult than the traditional version of that class. So what are some of the benefits for online learning? Well, the biggest benefit for online learning, which is what attracts most people, is the convenience and the flexibility for the classes. Online learning gives students the ability to access the classwork and the class material anywhere, anytime. They don't have to be set to a structured class meeting time in order to access the material and get the course done. As you see behind me, I'm also in the process of moving. So being in an online class has given me the flexibility to pack and move from place to place without having to plan a class meeting time into my schedule. This leads into the next benefit, which is location flexibility. Some students may not even be in the same state or country as the actual university is, yet they're able to take an entire course all online. This allows students to take courses or go to colleges that they might not be able to otherwise. This also teaches self-discipline. If any of you have ever taken an online course, you know that when you are taking the course, you need to be able to learn how to depend on yourself and rely on your own study habits and make sure that you get everything done on time. One of the other benefits that I covered in this section was how in an online course, each student can really be focused on as an individual. When you're in a classroom setting, it can almost be intimidating to approach the teacher or to ask questions that you may have because you feel like you're surrounded by your other peers and you don't want to seem out of place or seem like an idiot if you're asking a dumb question. When you're in an online setting, you have every right and you have the ability to reach out directly to the professor and ask any question that you have at any time. There are drawbacks to online learning though. The biggest one is just the limit of face-to-face interaction. You don't get to see your teacher rarely. You probably won't have much interaction with your peers other than online message boards. This can limit the amount of interaction that you may need to do group projects or to simply ask questions and get support for the class from either your peers or your teacher. Lastly, it's also kind of a benefit, but it's also a drawback if you don't do it correctly. Online learning takes a lot of self-discipline. Now, while I listed that as a benefit in the last section, if it's not properly instilled in each student to create self-discipline and to create good study habits, it can easily affect their grade and they could easily fail the class. Online learning takes a lot of determination from the student to know that they have to rely on themselves, and when they don't do that, it can be a very poor outcome. So let's talk about the benefits of in-person learning. The biggest one is it has a set meeting time, a set structured meeting time. This could be favorable for some students that like to have a full planned schedule. They need structure, they need a planned class time because they know that in that time is when they would be completing the work for each class. The next one is that it's easy to access the instructor. You see them face to face during that meeting time. You're able to approach them. You're able to really follow what they're teaching and what they're doing. Last, there's no additional online tools needed for most of the in-person learning classes. When you're doing an online learning class, you need things like a computer and internet, which some students may not have access to. This is why some students may be, for lack of a better term, forced to do in-person learning. So that may seem favorable to them. So let's talk about the drawbacks. While having a set scheduled meeting time can be seen as a benefit in some cases, it can also be seen as a hindrance in others. While students are trying to plan a busy schedule, it can be very difficult to find enough room throughout the week for all of these scheduled meeting classes. Next is the pace of learning. In most scheduled meetings, like traditional face-to-face classes, it seems like you have to go at the teacher's pace or the pace of the students around you. So if you're struggling or if you're falling behind, it's hard to keep up at times because you're not able to have that one-on-one question time as you would be able to in an online class. Next is the potential for cancellations. So this is strictly for traditional face-to-face classes because there's always going to be the risk, or I guess the opportunity, that the class may be canceled for any reason, whether the teacher becomes sick, has vacation time, or in an instance like this, a national pandemic comes and cancels the rest of the semester. There's always going to be some risk that the class meeting time is going to be canceled. That doesn't happen in an online learning setting. The last drawback that I talked about was the course material fees. While an online learning class does have course materials and you'll use a lot of the same materials, in a traditional in-person learning setting, a lot of times each student will have to buy more materials, whether they're actually buying books, buying files. These materials most of the time will be posted online for the students to access without the need to buy them in an online setting. The rest of my paper simply goes over more details of online learning versus traditional in-person learning. I come to the conclusion, supporting my hypothesis, that despite the benefits of it, online learning is the inferior method of learning. That being said, I am an advocate for online learning. I would be a hypocrite if I went against it because for the past 2 semesters, all of my classes have been online. However, I know that 90% of the time, traditional in-person learning can be less stressful and inevitably easier for students to do because they don't have to face the burden of teaching the class themselves, more or less. They have the support group of the students around them and the in-person support from the teacher in a traditional in-person setting. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you a brief short presentation of my research topic. And if you did find it interesting, maybe you would further look into it. I think especially during the COVID pandemic, it's interesting to think about as some classes that may traditionally only be in person are being transferred to online. Like in the spring semester, I did an online version of a microbiology class as well as its lab, and I quickly realized that this class shouldn't necessarily be taught online. So there are some classes where, in my opinion, should only be in person, and there's some classes where I think, would be great online class candidates. So, like I said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys are having a wonderful semester. Thanks.